It's a new Parliament and therefore a new inside the Lords. And I've been over there the last couple of days, and one of the things that's fascinating is the procedure that goes on to launch Parliament. And I just want to start off by reading what is read out in the House of Lords to launch the whole new parliamentary cycle. The Lord Privy Seal, who is Baroness Smith of Basildon now, she's the head of the House of Lords from the Labour Party because we've got a new government. She says the following: "My Lords, it is not convenient for His Majesty personally to be present here this day. He has been pleased to cause a commission under the Great Seal to be prepared in order to be the holding of this Parliament. Let the Commons know that the Lords Commissioners desire their immediate attendance in the House to hear the commission read." This is dating back hundreds and hundreds of years. You have 5 commissioners all dressed in the ermine, and the reason I'm telling you this is because everything starts in the Lords. So even though we live in a democratic society, actually the procedures in terms of the launching of Parliament are all based in the undemocratic, non-elected House of Lords. And we go through this palaver of the commissioners standing in for the King, send off to the Commons. The Commoners come, as in a delegation from the House of Commons, led this year by Edward Lee, who is the father of the House, the oldest or the longest standing male MP, and Diane Abbott, the mother of the House, the longest standing female MP, and they come and they have to kind of beg indulgence, and then they're sent out again. And this is like, it's like watching sort of amateur dramatics. They're sent out again, they have to go back to the Commons to decide their speaker. And then at the other end, you might well have seen this on the telly, they're kind of, the speaker is dragged to the speaker's chair, and hence Parliament begins. It's kind of arcane and quaint and a bit bonkers. I'm not arguing against tradition because I actually think tradition is very important, but I do get nervous about the fact that everything starts at the House of Lords and everything is to do with the King giving permission to Parliament. And in fact, that's exactly what will happen next week when we have the opening of the parliamentary session formally, which will be the King's speech. And again, everybody has to crowd into the Lords, and then the Commons get permission to launch their legislative programme. I just find it a bit odd, and I think it's worth noting. What we had to do was to queue up then to sign, or, to swear our oath again. This is the most I thought at first it would be sort of a certain amount of decorum would be held. No, it's like being in a very long queue for hours. I think I queued for 3 hours, and you're literally going in, you're reading the oath out, you're swearing it, then you have to sign in your, Baroness Watson-Buckley signature. And so it's kind of an interesting process, but a little bit kind of, it's literally conveyor belt. So the whole formality that we had seen with this performance is slightly undermined by this kind of rather hectic attempt. People literally jostling, queue jumping, all sorts of things. It was literally tense. It was like people going, that person wasn't in front of me before, that kind of thing. One of the things that was quite interesting though is that you then, because you have to queue up for so long, you end up talking to some people that you haven't talked to before. And I ended up talking to somebody, and I knew I recognised them, but I couldn't work it out. We had a very long conversation about politics, and it ended up being, of all people, the a person who ran the TUC for years. So there I was talking to a leading trade unionist, and he was asking me all about my political history. It just felt a very peculiar way of getting to know people, but actually quite nice in some ways. Let me just talk though, I'm only going to really confine my remarks to how the new government affects the Lords, but I did want to make some general remarks in terms of my attitude to the new government. One thing is that the atmosphere is very peculiar in Parliament at the moment, because can you imagine, I keep bumping into MPs saying hello and realising they're no longer MPs, they lost their seats and they're packing up boxes. So there's a kind of fairly bitter, sad, kind of reflecting a lot of very angry Conservatives, angry at their own side rather than anyone else, but kind of lashing out, but also quite a poignant and sad mood. And it feels, as I say, everyone a bit discombobulated. On the other hand, there's a real energy because there's so many new MPs coming into Parliament. And I'm not very optimistic about what I think the Labour Party can do in the long term. But you have to give credit where it's due. And although I think their victory was shallow, or they haven't received by any stretch of the imagination the majority percentage-wise of voters' endorsement in the election, I also don't want to willfully hope that they fail, because I'm a citizen of this country and they are the government of this country, and I wouldn't mind if they actually got a few things done. You know, if West Streeting actually improves the NHS, credit to him. I think it's incredibly ironic that you've got Tories grumbling that one of the things that's happened is that they've made a decision to take away the powers of local councils to block infrastructure projects in order that they can say that the Secretary of State can do that in terms of wind power and so on and so forth. But, then people are saying, well, is that right? Well, actually, that's what having the levers of government means, that you have power and you can make decisions like that, where you can not leave it up to the whims of local NIMBYs who get in the way of development or infrastructure projects. And it doesn't matter whether you don't like wind farms or solar panels or anything. The point is, they are taking control, and I do think that's what you expect a government to do. And it's a sign of the weakness of the previous government that they just didn't bother doing that. So, good luck to them in that sense. However, some things that I am nervous about. One of the things is that despite the rumblings under the surface that the House of Lords could well be abolished under Keir Starmer, something he did a U-turn on, and there's all supposed to be some reforms to make sure that there's not as many people in the House of Lords, because goodness knows there's far too many and so on. And whether they should be got rid of over 80, get rid of the hereditaries, all of this is going on. Despite that, one of the things as Keir Starmer has built his government is that they keep appointing ministerial people via the Lords, i.e. non-elected people into the Lords. So we've got a new Attorney General who is KC Richard Homer, who was one of the people who I know the name of because he pushed the International Court of Justice's claim that Israel is an apartheid state, for example. So that makes me anxious. And he's the new Attorney General. We've got Jackie Smith, who is a former Labour MP, hasn't been involved in politics for some time. Actually, she got driven out of government in 2009 because of the expenses scandal. Has gone on to make a very successful podcast with Ian Dale and is a broadcaster. She's back as the Higher Education Minister via the House of Lords. That's a very important post because, as you know, at the Academy of Ideas, higher education, what's happening with free speech and academic freedom is key. And here's Jackie Smith back, untested really in that area, and I'm not sure what she's going to position she's going to take, but nonetheless somebody that I'll be sitting close to in the House of Lords. And then we have James Timpson, who's been made the prisons minister. I was quite excited. Timpson dynasty has done a lot on prison reform. The Timpson's key cutting shop is one of the places that takes a lot of ex-prisoners to work, in some ways kind of an admirable character. Very liberal on prisons though, but it'll be an interesting appointment. But again, it's never had anything to do with politics. And we've got Patrick Vallance, very controversially made the science minister. He, of course, was somebody via the Lords. He, of course, was somebody who very controversially wanted harder lockdowns, was one of the people who, using the science tells us, introduced and justified everything from wearing masks to some of the absolutely anti-civil liberties laws that were brought in during that time when he was the chief scientific officer. And now he's a minister of science. And he was interviewed on World at One today, I think, on Radio 4, in which he decided that he would share his remarks that Brexit was a mistake, that freedom of movement was necessary, that we need to be giving out more visas for overseas people to work in the UK. These are not got anything to do with science, but he's now a government minister. And so he can say what he wants, but it doesn't appear to me to be particularly in line with this notion that the new government, have got hundreds and hundreds of new MPs, but they're still seeking to go outside of the elected chamber to find non-elected lords and making people live peers in order to bolster up the top table of the government. I think that's a bad sign in terms of what Starmer's trying to do. It emulates Gordon Brown's government of the talents, of all the talents, when he was briefly the Prime Minister, which he also used the Lords in that way. We saw the Conservatives do it when they brought in David Cameron, Lord Cameron, to be the Foreign Secretary. So this isn't a particularly anti-Labour point, but it doesn't indicate that they're particularly committed to democratic accountability if they use the Lords in that way, and I'm very nervous about it. Just a couple of other things on the Lords. That same Lord Cameron, who has really kind of enjoyed his time in the Lords. You know, I've mentioned before on Inside the Lords that every time he speaks, everybody's got their mouths open. It's kind of like a fan club from all political parties. The grown-ups back in the room. Well, as soon as he realised he wasn't going to be in power again, he said that he was stepping back from public office. So he's not even going to be the shadow foreign secretary. So he ran away after, Brexit, the day after, left the government, left his government absolutely anchorless when he did that, and now he just removed himself from foreign policy. I think it's graceless and it doesn't show maturity, and to his credit, Rishi Sunak hasn't done the same as the leader of the opposition from being a Prime Minister. Other Lords news is that when we go back, one person won't be a Labour peer anymore, and that's Lord Michael Cashman. Lord Michael Cashman is one of the big cheerleaders for Stonewall in the House of Lords, somebody who I've had many a run-in with, but has also promoted a lot of the trans ideology, used all of the slanderous insults at any of us who are sex realists or gender critical, assuming people to be far right, bigots and so on and so forth. But he went a step too far in the recess period, attacked Rosie Duffield on social media. The Labour Party, in opposition then as they were, or in the middle of the election campaign, even though they've never made peace with Rosie Duffield, were so embarrassed about how ridiculous it was, especially because it was in response to Rosie Duffield said she wasn't able to do hustings because of the threat to her physical safety, because of all of the trolls and the threats she get, and the police had even advised her not to go out, and Cashman basically called her lazy for not doing that, and so he had the whip removed. So he won't be back as a Labour peer. He'll be back, just like me, as non-affiliated, but rather shamed in the process. But on the better news, one of the best things that the outgoing government did was they gave a peerage to Hilary Cass. So in October, I think, Hilary Cass of the Cass Review, one of the commonsensical, science-based interventions into the gender-sex disputes, and particularly an important review in terms of protecting children, she's going to be Baroness Cass, and I can't wait. That is a wonderful thing to have happened. Just the final thing that I'll finish with is something else that's really bothering me. As I say, I want absolutely to encourage the government to carry on with their spades in the ground. We're going to build towns, we're going to build houses, we're going to get things done. That's very important. But one thing that has really concerned me is the new Minister for the Department for Media, Culture and Sport is Lisa Nandy. And Lisa Nandy yesterday did a big interview in which she said the culture wars are over, and went on to say, we won't have any of this sort of divisive rhetoric, any of these culture wars issues. There's a number of things that are very worrying about that, because the implication is that they're confected culture wars. This is somebody who's about to lead in a ministerial post at cabinet level arts organisations in this country. And if she's been following Denise Fahmy and Rosie Kay's manifesto for the arts, which is all about freedom of speech, if you talk to anyone in an arts or cultural organisation, you will know that they are absolutely toxic in relation to culture wars, but not culture wars confected by people just trying to get attention, but by people who are trying to drive out anyone who dares to exhibit wrongthink. There's a really unpleasant atmosphere. Literary festivals have lost their funding during the summer. due to disputes around Gaza and Israel. We've had a situation where somebody's just lost their job from Waterstones because she and her trans allyship, one of the booksellers for Waterstones, actually advocated the destroying of books by a gender critical author. You know, there's a lot going on in the arts and culture space. And for Lisa Nandy to say, oh no, I'm not bothering with all that, would indicate that she's showing a certain contempt for genuine problems. She's also in charge, by the way, of sport. And sport at the moment is being wrecked by the fact that there is confusion that continues to see women not being able to have their own sports category because trans women, as in men who identify as women, are taking their places. And if you follow any of the debates around the pool championships, which are now consistently being won by a man who self-defines as a woman, then the idea that she can sort of say, oh, I won't, dirty my hands with that kind of beneath contempt culture wars is just really not encouraging. And also she's in charge of media, and the media have been less than impartial when it's come to issues, particularly in relation to, of course, the gender sex issue, but also in terms of race, have shown real prejudice and partiality when it comes to problems around critical race theory, indeed the coverage of the Israel-Gaza war. So Lisa Nandy is going to have to confront the culture wars issues, not pretend that they don't exist, either ignore them or in fact as a consequence of just going along with the prevailing orthodoxies, allow them to let rip. Very worrying indeed. And I suppose a sign of the times wandering around Parliament for the last couple of days is, guess what? The place is drowning in rainbow lanyards. I mean, everywhere you look, there are people who work in Parliament, civil servants, SPADs, everybody demonstrably saying, I've got my rainbow lanyard on. And of course, one of the things that Esther McVey had done as the Common Sense Minister for the government, a slightly daft title, but anyway, had said we should have impartiality in the civil service. People shouldn't wear their lanyards. They shouldn't parade their political views as a kind of threatening action, almost a kind of passive aggression. I've got the right lanyard on. That's immediately been scuppered by Number 10's team. That's gone. And actually, even the notion that the civil service self-organising groups should prove that they're impartial, that's gone as well. So Lisa Nandy, culture, I can tell you, is rife with problems. I can't finish without noting that there are some new kids in the block, and we have, very worrying, I think, a bunch of Islamist supporting candidates. The Muslim vote has made it very clear that it's not just a question of them being on the side of Gaza, but that they're hostile to the very existence of Israel. There's been some very unpleasant scenes in the election, and 4 or 5 of those people have now been elected. We also, though, have the Reform 5, and that will undoubtedly cause some, stir things up a bit. So already Nigel Farage has made his first speech. And although they're in the different chamber, in the elected chamber, not the House of Lords, I will be kind of looking out for the kind of ripples they can send. And what we can conclude is not that I'm not pro-reform, I'm not particularly involved in any political party, but what we do recognise that has happened in this election is there is no longer a two-party system in this country. The whole ecosystem of politics has been thrown up in the air. There is no longer safe seats. Anyone can lose their seat, and many people have. And it was kind of, as I say, sad to see some of the MPs that I respected in the Tories wandering around looking kind of, rather sad as they were packing up and leaving. I think that is a shame because some of them were very good MPs, regardless of their parties. But it's also the case that things are just up in the air, and that gives opportunities. It's very exciting for those of us who want to change politics for good, who are interested in grassroots campaigns, shaking up the Westminster Village from their complacency. One personal challenge to me, and this is my final remark, is in the course of that, where I sit in the House of Lords, where I have sat since I went in 3.5 years ago, is on the back seat behind the Labour Party, Well, of course, that was because those seats were the opposition benches. Now what's happened is that I'm sitting in the same seat, but guess what? I'm surrounded by Conservatives and Tories, right? And it was a very odd experience yesterday when I was in there thinking, oh God, I don't know if I quite can cope with this, because there's so many Tory lords, and they're obviously all were all in yesterday. They won't be in all the time, not as often as I often am. But the Labour Party were on the other side, so we actually crossed seats. I felt uncomfortable, and one of the reasons I did was that I met one of the Tory lords last night. He said that he defended my honour because some of the Labour lords, some of the kind of more, Remainiac critics that I have, some of the people who bullied me, in fact, when I sat behind them on the Labour side, they were saying, Baroness Fox of Buckley has joined the far right. At least she's come out as a far right. He said that one of them had said that I was a neo-fascist. So I'm glad to see that the Labour Party's lack of sectarianism, being nice, let's all work together for the sake of the country, is back in play. But obviously, I also resent deeply that they try and imply that I'm a Conservative, because I am not a Conservative or a Tory, any more than I was Labour Party when I sat behind them. What I am is I'm a non-affiliated peer in the House of Lords, and my job is to act as an opposition spokesman, to represent views that wouldn't otherwise be heard in the House of Lords, and to hold whichever government is in power to account, to scrutinise every single word they say, every bill and every law that they bring in, to the best of my ability. So I will continue to sit, even if I'm surrounded by Tories, in the opposition benches, even though I'll feel slightly uncomfortable, and even though some people on the Labour benches would like to pretend that I've joined the Conservatives. Don't worry, folks, I haven't. But opening my mouth and saying the unsayable, I will continue to do. So, more next week, once we get a sense of the legislative programme from the new government. And all I can say is, I expect a lively parliamentary period ahead.